Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? I spent 8 years in prison. In the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of holding and hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard, dry it out in the sun, sharpen it down to a point on the concrete and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. I saw a guy get in a fight with his cousin over a 50-cent bowl. This escalated more and more until they started fighting. We all kinda watched out the corner of our eyes. BC was in the cell while the doors were open. Well, the guy that was pissed about the bowl grabbed the dude by the hair and bite a huge hunk of his cousin's eyebrow off, like about half of it. If that wasn't bad enough, me and my cellmate moved into the cell. BC it was further away from the TV. So we are cleaning up the cell and my cellmate goes, "Holy duck, look at this." He lifts up what I thought was a dead hairy bug. Nope. Furry ass eyebrow and skin. Doesn't haunt me. Just crazy to think a guy lost half an eyebrow over a ducking 50-cent bowl. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by 2 others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's V to check if she had came in with a parcel. Drugs. This was in the communal shower, so yeah, addicts didn't give a duck. I remember people kinda turned on each other out of boredom. I mean, you made friends and all, but you had it hanging over you that you were a bad guy, and some people took to being assholes and provoked others seemingly out of boredom. It was an unpleasant situation to be on the other side, because you wanted to stay out of trouble too, but at the same time had to stand up for yourself. Maybe not the absolute worst I saw, but something I remember. I made a friend early on who was sentenced to life for killing a man that had touched his niece. He'd been locked up for about 5 or 6 years when I'd first met him. Talked to him every day for 3 years, and one day he comes up to me and says he needs to talk to me about something. We do a lap on the back 40 and he tells me his old lady is leaving him and isn't bringing his daughter up to come see him anymore. He's actually crying. I didn't know what I could do to help him, so I let him cry and told him to not let it bother him. Maybe she'll come around. We go on about our day, and everything seems normal. That night he woke me up. He bunked across the hall, crying. I got up to talk to him and he says he wants to die, and that he's glad I'm up because he doesn't want to be alone. I start hitting the panic button for my cell and screaming for a guard, but no one comes, and I have to watch while he prees his mirror off of his wall. He put on his linens and blanket like a big robe and he cuts his stomach with his mirror. It was hard to see much because of the blankets and the dark, but I could smell his blood. Then he lit his blankets on fire. The cops got there when the smoke alarm went off, but they were too late. I still have nightmares about it, screaming for him to stop, to just talk it out, but he never does. I've seen a lot of ducked up it, man, but this was probably the worst, or, at least, it stuck with me the longest. Edit. Thanks for the hugs and support, everyone. Makes how I feel after sharing hurt a little less. I appreciate it. It's not the craziest thing I saw, but it's a social norm in prison that goes on daily. I'll never forget how socially acceptable jackers were. Like somebody would be wearing a coat or hoodie etc and stare at a female CO and jack off. Sometimes sitting on a bench, sometime the TV room, and nobody bats an eye. One time a dude was like, "Hey man, can you move a row over? You know I'm watching," and didn't skip a beat, cranking off to an ugly 60-something-year-old woman. It's ducked up, but after a while you just accept that some people went nuts in there. Saw a dude get his face turned to hamburger over a card game. Dude lost, so he sucker punches the guy across from him a minute later, gets on top of him, and probably get about 10 hits in by the time the CO broke it up. Blood everywhere. I was like, holy duck dart. It was like my first month there and it made me kinda not wanna leave the cell. My bunkie was a blood and jacks. He's like, dude, nobody will duck with you. I'm like, okay, I hope not. I'm pretty sure he smashed his eye socket in. Edit. Holy, I didn't expect this many upvotes, lol. Dudes thinking no one notices their bedsheets ruffling during lights out. My uncle was in for 17 years for marijuana related charges. He was in a ward with 2 other guys with the same name as him. Both of them in for 7 years. One of them killed a guy and the other was a child molester. One day when my uncle was in the showers, a group of guys who mistaken him as a child molester were about to serve prison justice on the wrong guy. He quickly realized the situation, sprinted naked out the showers to grab his papers to show the guys they had the wrong dude. Not a prisoner but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison GP. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical. Blah blah. And the guy was about to leave. The GP mentoring me said, "Hey, check out his colostomy real quick." The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off and he has these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused and the guy left super quick. GP just shrugged. Later that day, I asked the GP what was up. Apparently the other prisoners ducked that guy's colostomy hole, and he had gotten herpes of the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. Seeing someone on the threes jump to his death. Just missing PPL on the deck. Not prison but jail. 6 months pregnant and her water broke. COs didn't believe her and waited to take her to the hospital until she was hemorrhaging. The baby died and the woman was released because they didn't want to pay medical costs. This was 2004-ish. Not exactly prison but how about being laughed at when asked to show a guard that your molar just broke in half with one part in your hand and the other profusely bleeding. I'll ask the dentist for an emergency visit. Paperwork came back for a visit in 6 months. Duck Fresno County Jail. Cool story. I was a small-time criminal in my youth. Got locked up for some weed for the weekend. I never experienced much kindness that I could remember from people but I did in jail. I couldn't use the bathroom in my cell because I was too scared and these guys started talking to me and distracting me so I could go. It was the strangest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. Been intrigued by behavior ever since. I've never been to prison but my cousin did and he came back out all sorts of messed up. He was arrested for drugs. According to him he spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement. For his safety, he said that his first couple of months they were okay, as far as prison goes, but that one day, for whatever reason some guy who had been kept separate from the general population was accidentally put with the rest of the prisoners, unsupervised, and that a few prisoners grabbed the guy and that they stomped on his elbows and legs to break them before they sodomized him with some shivs. My cousin said that those guys did it all in an instant and that they threatened him if he snitched. My cousin was later interviewed by some of the guards before they took the guys who did this and so some thought that he had snitched. He says that he didn't. But that didn't matter because the guards had put him in solitary for safety and was eventually kept there for months longer. Because he wouldn't snitch so they tried to accuse him of being an accomplice. Also, thank you for the silver. I spent 2 weeks awaiting trial in Johannesburg Central Prison. Saw a guy with mental issues get severely beaten one night after he attacked another inmate. Saw another guy have a kettle of boiling water poured over him another evening after an argument with another prisoner. In both cases the wardens did nothing until the following morning. I was lucky. I managed to avoid any issues while I was there. Overall a crappy experience. 0/10. Would not recommend. I worked in the medical department of a large prison in Florida. We had an inmate bite a bigger inmate's nose off. The tip. The bigger guy kept asking the kid for 6 and the kid had enough. We saw several stabbings. Several were life flighted out. But those weren't the most interesting. We had an inmate smoke some bad spice. Made out of God knows what. He came to medical out of his mind and later died because it caused brain hemorrhaging. One guy got a dislocated patella and was just sitting patiently as I got his info. I asked if it hurt and he said yeah. I asked how he was so chill and he replied, because I'm not rich. Saw this in a similar post. Some guy was doing a 2-year stretch for something. Anyway, he was laying awake his first night when he heard the microwave. He didn't think much of it and ignored it. Then a few minutes later he hears this blood-curdling scream. Apparently the guy using the microwave heated up a tub of Vaseline to boiling point, then he pours it on some guy's face. I think it was revenge for the guy talking smack about him. As a corrections officer, I've responded to, and in some cases prevented, suicides typically by hanging but sometimes cutting wrists. Stabbing and beatings take place. Of course, there is always someone angry at someone. Fighting and bloody attacks at my facility were about once per week. Rape is less common than movies suggest, but there is very likely a 6 for service trade going on somewhere, and every few months, 2-3 times a year, an inmate would use the tip line to report sexual abuse by another inmate. Co-worker of mine here in Delaware during a riot got his teeth stomped in, and while he lay there bleeding, some of the dudes on death row surrounded a female guard and protected her from all the other dudes who wanted to abuse her. Honor among thieves, how about it? They actually got their sentences reduced, I believe. Not the worst, but I hope it's uplifting. Edit. I should have said the dudes who had life not death row, my bad. I did a year spread out over a few 2 yards in AZ. Low level yards. I didn't see much that really shocked me. I'd been on the street prior to being locked up, so anything I saw happen in prison was more of the same really. There were fights, and people catching heat from their own people for ducking up and breaking rules. But for the most part it was fairly tame. I think the part that sticks with me the most is the amount of very clearly mentally ill people who were locked up with me, but were getting no help whatsoever. I mean, none of us were really getting any help. But some of these guys were clearly going to have no option when they left except to go back to what they were doing. To me, that was the worst thing I saw. The absolute apathy of the system as a whole. I was incarcerated with 1,200 other inmates on 1 yard in Tuscan, in a complex that had, I believe, 7 or 8 other yards on it. This is of course one of many complexes in AZ. This also came as a shock to me when I really thought about it. Just the incredible amount of people being locked up. Most of the people I did time with were in for non-violent, drug-related offenses. I've never been to prison, but my uncle has, and his story was really interesting and kind of disturbing. We live in Mexico, Guadalajara. My uncle has diabetes, and at that time his health was really bad. He had a divorce 12 years ago, and her ex-wife and him lost all contact, so she didn't know about his condition. She didn't receive her pension, so she sued him, and by the end of that week he was taken to a prison called 20 Grand. He was there only for 3 days. It was easy to prove that it was impossible to work in that state, but he saw a lot of terrifying stuff there. First of all, prisoners have a hierarchy there. When new prisoners come, there are prisoners with power to judge them and punish them according to their stories on how they got there. Guards know this, but there's a lot of people with power inside the cells. According to my uncle, they were taken to a large room by the guards. When they left, the prisoners came and started questioning them. One of the new prisoners admitted to raping a girl, getting caught by the police and ending up in prison. The other prisoners got so disgusted that they beat him up and then violated him with a stick. He saw this happen before he was questioned himself. Thankfully nothing bad happened to my uncle when he was there, and he got out of there as soon as we were able to prove that he had diabetes. He told this story just as he got out of there, and when I was 17. No, an ex-prisoner, but I was in a holding cell for a few hours. Long story involving alcohol and fighting outside a pub. Buyout, an older man was having a stroke. His pain cries for help were met with "shut the duck up or I'll give you a rein to need help and sick of hearing you." He has some pretty bad brain damage. One of the officers never returned to that line of work. There was a guy I was locked up with in Baldwin County, Al, who went into our block's common area library, just a bookshelf with about 50-60 books, and ripped out the last chapter of every single ducking book. I've been into one charge, just transferred from a low to medium security to get into a program. The low overall was a crap hole. Bad food, technically overcrowded, but it wasn't that bad. Lots of loud mouths, but no violence that I saw when I was there. The medium, however, that was a different story. Good food, looked more like a college campus. No overcrowding. Scores of pool tables. Saw a guy get stabbed in the head. Never saw so much blood in my life. The groundkeepers kept that place immaculate. Saw 2 guys fight and topple over my tower of cereal. One, kinda soft white guy, got knocked down and had his face smashed in by a jacked up black guy. Oh yeah, we had unlimited soda fountain use in the mess hall. Not prison, but county jail. I was doing 90 days and a woman who was very pregnant went into labor. They refused to take her to the hospital until her contractions were 2 minutes apart. When they finally did, they shackled her to the bed. They refused to unlock the shackles even when the baby was in danger. She lost the baby and almost bled out. She was in jail for traffic tickets. I spent a bit of time in both a Cambodian and an American jail. The worst thing I saw in the American system was the cycling of severely mentally ill women to a mental health facility where they would rubber stamp them as fit for trial and then back to jail. Then back to the mental health facility. Another rubber stamp. Then back to jail. They were caught endlessly in this loop. I had jail staff taunt me for being transgender. Locked in solitary for months with no reason. A charity got involved and helped me. I was innocent. Generally the other inmates are more kind and humane than the staff. With notable exceptions on both sides. I've been cleaning crew and had to clean up isolation cells covered top to bottom in blood and feces. In Cambodia I saw people suffering seizures while the jail staff looked on curiously, but did nothing. I saw rampant corruption, but it was actually in my favor. My friends brought me food and medicine by bribing the guards. I saw hungry women fight over rice. I was innocent but suffered enormously. I'm so happy to be free again. My heart goes out to all the people who have been imprisoned unjustly. Never been. But my friend next to me just got released after a 9-year stint. He said the worst one he saw was when the whites did a removal. It's where one of them ducks up bad enough they try to kill him. He said they were told ahead of time by the main guy for the whites out of respect. Guy manages to get the corner of one of those metal vent covers and proceeds to stab the removal in the kidneys 3 times. Then in the throat and upper chest, too many to count. Guy was still stabbing after getting hit with mace and a rubber bullet. Removal's last words were, "You got the wrong guy." Inside the prison walls, asbestos. Not me but my brother. He always had substance abuse problems and depression. It was obvious he needed professional help and what he got instead was over 7 years of his life lost to jail and prison. Stabbings? He's seen it. Rape? Seen it. Overdoses? Assaults? Lack of medical treatment? Guards beat a guy almost to death for talking back? Inmates forced to rub hot sauce on their D's by COs? Made to fight each other, seen it all, but the worst part is how my brother almost died from an infection in his lungs and when he asked for help, struggling to breathe and stand upright. The nurse and officers called him a liar and charged him $50 for a false medical visit. He collapsed and almost died before he was taken to a hospital and nobody was punished. Nobody lost their job. And when he did get out he had to pay court costs, fines, bills, maintenance for house arrest device, and a million other things. And he did it all and is now a law-abiding citizen with most of his rights restored, but try telling that to anyone hiring for a job. My cousin is locked up right now and I can guarantee it's all still the same in this hellhole state, NC. When I think of what my brother and many others had to go through alone when what they needed was help, it makes me cry. I went to a YOI as a teen, and easily the worst thing. Knowing many of the people I met and they would probably be spending the majority of the rest of their lives behind bars. Some weren't bad people. Some just didn't have a good start in life. No education. Not known a different way to live. I still wonder where some of them are today 20 years later. Any American prisoners here? Yeah, maybe prison reform isn't too bad of an idea for you. Compared to Europe, and people actually exit prisons as changed people. But in a positive way. I know plenty of people who were just legit losers doing small time crime out of boredom. Went to prison and when they left they all suddenly started new jobs and earned their own living. I have been to state prison, but the worst things I saw were in county jail. While on a high bail block, a teen came in for lighting fire in a rapper stale at the mall. He was definitely mentally handicapped. Perhaps autistic. They put him in a cell with a guy who killed a woman in the 80s and was only in county for parole hearing. That night the block endured horrible screams as poor kid's virginity was taken. The next morning at chow was the most quiet I ever heard. Kid was taken to medical after chow. Not the most messed up, but this stuck with me for whatever reason. While studying medicine, I was working at a prison clinic in NY. Guy comes in with a fairly dirty cast on his arm. Otherwise he seems fairly normal. He's there to have his cast removed. So I ask him when they put the cast on. He says December. It's late January. So yeah, it's been enough time for the bone to heal. I figured his living conditions were the reason for the cast looking like that, so I got the okay and started removing the cast. The smell. His skin underneath looked terrible, and there were little pieces of wood and other crap embedded in the skin. Complete atrophy of the casted forearm. After further questioning, it turns out the cast had been on his arm for over a year, and it was just getting removed. I was glad to be getting out of that rotation. Was in the TV room during late night in a dorm unit pretty early on in my 10-year bid. There were only a few guys in there since it was about to close, and I was towards the back of the room. A guy walked in with a coffee cup, sets it down at a chair a couple rows in front of me, then leaves the room again. There was an older white guy sitting in the seat directly in front of the coffee chair. Couple minutes later, the man who left the coffee comes back in through the back door of the TV room, walks right past me with a huge piece of metal. It looks like a giant tin can top. He walked right to the chair behind the older white guy and brought the metal around to the front of his neck and started ducking, sawing this dude's head off a few feet away from me. I was stunned and watched for a while, but I eventually got up and walked out the back door, being careful not to make furtive movements to tip off the CO at the desk. The next morning, I learned that the older guy was a child molester and had been nearly decapitated. The giant piece of metal was the entire top of a toilet sink console that had been removed, flattened, and sharpened. Was definitely among the craziest incidents of violence I saw in there. I was in a prison that was split. One side was a level 4 facility, just under max, and the other was for mentally ill inmates. One day they decided to move some of their more stable mentally ill patients to our side, the level 4 side. There was this really huge dude who, as soon as he got to our prison, just started screaming that he wanted to go back. He turned and found the person closest to him. I was down the hallway from him, and he proceeds to beat the hell out of this random dude. Dude went into a coma and died 2 days later. It was horrifying to watch this blatant display of random violence that ended with someone dead. I won't ever forget it. Oh boy. Okay. I went to jail for a whole 24 hours period over some traffic related stuff. I was in it for the whole experience: the Crocs, the orange jumpsuit, ham sandwich, booster shots. It was wild, especially since I'm an overall decent citizen with no felonies or anything that would warrant me ending up there, except for unpaid traffic tickets. Anyway, I was being registered. There was a very large, definitely gang affiliated black man who was being brought in from another district and literally walked in the door of the jail in handcuffs with officers, yelling about how this county's HS jail wasn't nothing compared to his county's jail and basically taunting the officers. There was one super big officer they called Tex. The man legit looked like Shrek. He was openly racist and kinda wasn't having it with the new guy who was talking it. So, I watched them purposely leave this new guy's cell open a crack so he tried stepping out, and 6 officers mobbed him and beat the piss out of him. Next, he was being brought into the powder room to be thoroughly checked in his ass for weapons, dressed and sent back to his tank. They sent no other than Tex in to help powder his ass. 5 of the other officers waited outside, knowing what would happen, and it can only be assumed that Tex took advantage of being crammed alone in a small space with this person and started beating on him. Once again, the other 5 joined in and beat the piss out of the guy. He was bleeding all over. It was a pretty wild experience to see how blatantly obvious it was that they just wanted to beat someone's ass. A guy get his face beaten by a dude with a cast on his arm because guy took dude's ketchup pack off his plate on hot dog day. My dad is a prison guard. He worked a night shift once, which was based on the wings. I was eating breakfast when my dad came home and he was shaking. Turns out a prisoner set himself on fire inside his cell and my dad basically watched him burn from the other side whilst he waited for the guard in the room at the end of the wing to open the door. Pretty heavy it.